Hello and welcome back to Clarkenomics. In this video, we're going to cover the basics of a market economy. Now, the first thing I want to note here when we talk about these types of economies in the upcoming videos, we're dealing with a spectrum that's really based upon one thing, economic freedom. Now, in this video and subsequent videos, we're going to look at idealized economic systems. What that means is these are perfected versions of an economic system. And an economic system is the same thing as an economy. It's some way for allocating products and resources. So the key thing here is that there are no pure command economies or pure market economies. In the real world, every country technically has what's called a mixed economy. There are some aspects of a command economy, some aspects of a market economy, and countries find the balance. So it's set up like this. You've got a spectrum. On the one end, you've got market. On the other end, you've got command. And every country exists somewhere on this spectrum, right? On the market side, things are freer. On the command side, people have less freedom. So for instance, on the command side, we've got North Korea. Very restricted economy by the government. But as we move to the left here, we've got Russia. Russia still has a pretty authoritarian kind of economy. The government kind of calls the shots, but still not as restrictive as North Korea. The United States leans towards free market. They're definitely freer than the Russian economy, but the US economy is not as free as, per se, Hong Kong's economy. So every country, in addition to the four that I've plotted on the spectrum, has either a command-leaning type of economy or a market-leaning type of economy. But the key thing is no country is really a command economy and no country is a pure market economy. Every country is technically a mixed that leans one way or the other. Now, a market economy, to define that, is where the factors of production, think back to them, land, labor, capital, are all privately owned, as opposed to publicly owned. So publicly owned means owned by the government. Privately owned means owned by individuals, such as households and firms, which you might remember if you've seen the video on the circular flow model. So in a market economy, the government's really not involved in any meaningful way in the economy. Thinking back again to the circular flow, there is no government in this model, right? There's firms, there's households, and there are the markets where they interact with each other. But the government is not really involved at all in a market economy. Again, a pure market economy. So how do they allocate goods, services, and resources? It's all about markets, which should be obvious because this is called a market economy. A market, is just a place where buyers and sellers come together, whether they're buying products or whether they're buying factors of production. Now, the key thing here, because the government's not telling them what to do, firms, households are all doing what's best for themselves. They're acting in their own self-interest. They don't care about the other one. They're not trying to make the other one better off. They're only in it for themselves. So in a market, let's think about what their goals are. Households spend money on products. They don't want to spend money on products, but they have to. Households want to minimize how much money they're spending. They don't want to spend a lot of money. They want to spend as little as possible. On the flip side, households not only buy products, but they sell resources like labor. Think about it, right? So when you work for a company, you're selling your labor. And you want to get paid as much as possible. So you're trying to minimize your spending as a consumer, but maximize your income as a resource owner. On the flip side, firms, they are selling products in the product market, and in exchange for those products, they're earning revenue. And of course, they want to earn as much revenue as they can. So firms want to maximize revenue, how much money they're earning. But remember, they're not just earning money, they also have to pay money because they're using factors of production such as labor to produce their products. And they would like to pay as little as possible for that labor. So they're trying to minimize the wages they pay their workers, wages and salaries. And if you can't tell, this is going to set up a conflict. Markets are a conflict-based system. So in the photo you see here, which is a delightful stock photo, you see a car salesman and you see a couple buying a car. Now let's think about what the goals are of each party here. The couple, they want to minimize their spending. In other words, they're trying to negotiate the lowest possible price for the car that they're buying. Now, the car salesman, the guy in the suit there, he's trying to maximize the car company's revenue. He's trying to negotiate the highest possible price for the car from this couple. So this is the conflict. The couple wants a low price, he wants a high price, and they have to negotiate and find a price somewhere in the middle. And that's how prices work in a market economy. Prices are an extremely useful thing for increasing the efficiency of markets because what they do is they quantify things. They put numbers on things. Things like cost, right? How much does this cost? What's the marginal cost? We don't have to, estimate it or say like I'll trade you this for this in a barter system. We can say, "Oh, okay, that will cost me $2." It's easy. Everybody understands it. And also we can say, all right, this is the price, this is the value. If I buy this thing, that means that I must value it at least that much. So again, if it's a $2 cup of coffee and you go ahead and buy it, that means that you value that coffee at least $2. Now again, how are prices determined? Well, it's all about markets. Think of it like a tug of war. You've got buyers, you've got sellers, and the thing that they're fighting over is prices, right? So buyers again are trying to get the highest price possible. Sorry, that's wrong. Buyers are trying to get the lowest price possible, just seeing if you're paying attention. And sellers are trying to get the highest price possible. And where those two land is what prices are going to be. Now, later on in the course, we're going to look at this in a more technical way. We're going to look at something, that looks like this. It's got a demand curve and a supply curve, and where those two things meet, we have a market equilibrium, and that's how prices are set. But in a basic sense, just remember, buyers will like low prices, sellers like high prices, and they have to compromise. Now, let's talk about the role of competition. Competition is extremely important in market economies, and here's why. We call it the invisible hand because it regulates, it controls prices in markets. Again, going back to that tug of war, it's not like somebody comes along and says, all right, this will be the price for this. It's up to hundreds of buyers and hundreds of sellers that kind of all work this out without even talking to each other. So think about why. Let's say we're looking at the product market. Let's talk competition in the product market. In the product market, you've got competition between consumers. So think about an auction, if you will, right? One person says, I'll pay $10. Another person who also wants that product, and there's not enough for everybody, says, I'll pay $20. And they're bidding the price up. So when buyers compete to get something, prices get pushed upwards. But then you've got competition between producers. Producers would like to sell the thing that they're selling. And how do you get people to buy what you're selling? You try to lower the price, right? So think about the sales that you guys see out there. As companies want to sell more, they'll lower the price. So the company will say, I'll sell this for $10. Another company will say, okay, I'll sell it for $5. And it's that competition between sellers that pushes prices down. Now again, just to be clear, the sellers don't want to do this, right? They'd like to sell for the highest prices possible, but competition between sellers is what pushes prices down. Just like the buyers, in an auction, they don't want to pay a higher price, but they have to if they want the good. It's that competition that either pushes prices up or pushes prices down. But it actually works the same way in like the factor market. And the factor market, there's all kinds of different factors, but let's focus on labor for a second. Firms are the buyers of labor, right? Companies aren't selling labor, companies are buying labor. They want people to work for them. It's the households that sell labor, because that's one of the resources that they own. It's the resource that every household owns is labor. And competition works the same way. So for instance, if you've got a bunch of people who really want to work and they want to get a job, they want to get hired, they're going to offer the lowest price possible for their labor, or not the lowest price possible, but lower than the competition. So if a worker says, I will pick vegetables for $10 today, another worker might say, I'll pick vegetables for $5 today. And that competition is what pushes prices down. And this is sometimes how people get exploited in certain labor markets, especially for undocumented workers. And so there's that. Workers are competing with each other because they want work. At the same time, firms are competing with each other to hire labor, and that's pushing prices up. So it's no accident that people who work in technology typically make a lot of money because these companies are offering the best money for the best workers. So Facebook, Twitter, Google, they're all competing with each other trying to get the best workers. And if you want the best workers, you're going to need to pay them more. So it's the same thing, we're just buying and selling something different. In this market, we're not selling products, we're selling factors such as labor. And so workers compete with each other, that pushes prices down. Now, things like unions are designed to get around that. Unions are workers teaming up with each other to negotiate higher wages. But in a union-free environment, they're competing and pushing prices down. And it's firms who are competing for workers and pushing prices upwards. Now, that all sounds pretty bad, pretty cutthroat, not a lot of fun. but it does yield some pretty good results. So there are some byproducts of competition. First things first, productivity, right? We've studied productivity in another video where, it's output per worker. Well, in a market economy, if you want to keep your job, you need to be productive because you need to show your employer that you're worth how much they're paying you, or you might want to get paid more, which means you need to be even more productive. So there's that. Companies also will minimize costs so that they can lower their prices without losing money. So because it's such a competitive environment, workers try to be as productive as they can, work as hard as they can, as smart as they can, and companies also try to produce their products for cheaper. Also, innovation. Innovation comes from competition too. Let's think about why. If a company wants to get new customers, they can sell the same things they've always sold, but if they want to get new customers, they have to innovate, develop new products, develop improvements to their products, or at least make people think that they have, right? So innovation is a result of competition. If you never have to compete with anybody, you never have to be better. But productivity comes from that competition. Innovation comes from that. Not only that, but in this environment, entrepreneurs in a market economy can create successful new firms with new ideas. And that competition and the incentive to maybe make money is what drives these people with their ideas to go out and take a risk and to create new stuff. So although competition can be brutal and not so much fun, there are some good things for everybody that come from it. And that sets up the final slide here, which is the history and philosophy of market economies. So if you're hearing me talk about market economies and it sounds a lot like capitalism, you would be correct. Market economies are something that we associate with a philosophy called capitalism. And capitalism is a pretty old idea, a few hundred years old now. And it was first really developed by this guy right here. He's Scottish, Adam Smith. He's sometimes called the father of economics because although he would have called himself a philosopher, he really kind of laid the groundwork for the discipline that we would today call economics. He's also referred to sometimes as the father of capitalism. Now, some core ideas of capitalism were laid down in 1776, same year as the Declaration of Independence, in a book. This is the shortened title called The Wealth of Nations. And here's three of the important points of the Wealth of Nations. One, here's a quote first. It's not from the benevolence, the kindness, of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. So what he's saying here is, the butcher, the person who provides meat, the brewer for, beer and whatever, and the baker who makes bread, they don't do it for you. They're not doing it to be nice so that you can eat and, survive. They're doing it for themselves because they expect to be paid for it. So it's, greed, but it's greed that actually helps everybody. So the first thing is people will act in their own self-interest, but this creates benefits for others as well. Two, competition regulates prices, like we talked about, and creates economic growth. Economic growth comes from innovation, comes from productivity, right? And so competition forces us to be better and to develop new ideas, and that creates growth, which creates positive effects for everybody. So that also ties back to the first point. And finally, government involvement in an economy messes everything up. Markets are a great way to allocate products and resources, and whenever our government tries to come in and make that different, they're going to make things worse, according to Adam Smith. So in a market economy, Adam Smith would like this because the government is not involved. So those are some of the basic ideas of market economies. Thanks for watching.